for All webinar. My name is Andrea Gillespie, and I'm the Senior Manager of Community Development at Charles Schwab Bank, and your host of this webinar series, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. In each episode of the Housing for All webinar, we have brief but impactful one-on-one conversations with members of the Dallas Housing Coalition and other community leaders who are Dallas's strongest advocates for keeping the city affordable. Joining us this morning is Kirk Presley. Kurt is an investment associate with Ojala Partners, a Dallas-based mixed-income housing developer focused on creating new attainable housing through innovative public-private partnerships. Kurt works to build and foster relationships with public partners, government agencies, and housing authorities. Since joining Ojala in 2020, he has facilitated the development of over 2,500 mixed income and affordable units. Kurt graduated from SMU Cox School of Business in 2008 with degrees in finance, economics, and public policy. He is an active member of the Real Estate Council and a board member for SMU's Folsom Institute for Real Estate. Kurt, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to Henry and Brian, as always, for hosting this event.
Yes. And I know we're going to have a great conversation. But before we get started, normally how I would kick off things is just asking you to share more about Ojala and the work that it does in the housing space. But before we get into any of that, I do want to acknowledge those of us in the affordable housing, community development, empowerment, and community organizing space lost a great one earlier this week. Raul Reyes Jr. of West Dallas One. He is one of the founding steering committee members of the Dallas Housing Coalition. I didn't work with him long, but I could tell he knew more about the landscape in Dallas and the issues that we care about in his pinky than probably 10 people combined. So I just wanted to reflect on the work of Raul and how important he was to the work you're doing with Ojala.
Yes, thank you for that. Raul was a great leader in his community. We first met Raul about 3 years ago on one of our projects in West Dallas on West Commerce. And he really pushed us as a developer to go above and beyond the normal. It's one thing to have a community meeting or 2 community meetings or 3 community meetings for a project that you have planned in a neighborhood. More or less, you're honestly forced to do that kind of by the city during the zoning process. Raul really pushed us to really get involved with more than just housing issues, but other social issues that have affected West Dallas for generations. So, going to meetings for downwinders at risk in West Dallas One, and showing up and being a voice at things like the GAF shingle plant zoning conversation. We're really thankful that the work he was doing impacted us at Ojala. And it's obvious that the work that he did impacted, his neighborhood and his community. And, I'm sure most of the people listening to this call have been impacted by Raul through the work that he did. So it's very tragic that he's passed. And, the city has lost a great, social advocate, warrior, community fighter, and he'll be greatly missed.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for sharing those reflections, as I think so many of us are still grappling with his loss and thinking about how to carry his legacy forward. So with that, I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about your company, Ojala Partners, and just all the great work that y'all are doing in the housing space. And I'm wondering, for those of us who are less familiar with the company, if you could share a few examples of some of the more successful mixed income housing projects that you've worked on in the last few years.
Yes. So Ojala is a Dallas-based housing firm. The last 8 years, our entire business has centered around what we call mission-driven housing. And so that's a lot of different programs that fit kind of around the call it the spectrum of affordable housing. So that's included everything from permanent supportive housing for the chronically homeless, to properties that have both market rate and affordable units at them. So, the two sort of, I guess, our calling card in Dallas of the last year or so has been what was known as the standard shoreline. That was a large zoning case and a zoning case for affordable housing on Garland Road in East Dallas. That project is under construction. It's called the Hayden, is the name of the project, which is actually one of our principals, Matt. That's the name of his first son, Hayden. So the Hayden is under construction. And then other than that, probably our most what I'll call successful projects would be two hotels that we purchased, both in the city of Fort Worth, where through a combination of federal funds, housing authority vouchers, and city funds, we were able to convert two hotels into housing for the chronically homeless at one, and one where we converted to a family shelter, so temporary housing where as a family gets out of a shelter, they need a temporary housing while they wait to get put into sort of traditional affordable housing, like perhaps a tax credit property where they can be more stable and have a permanent address. So those is the being the Casa de Esperanza and the Casa de Sueños in Fort Worth.
That's very incredible, and that's also a good segue for my next question, because I think you alluded to a little bit about the breadth and the types of partners that you have to bring to bear to get projects like what you're doing in Fort Worth off the ground. So to that end, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what have been the key partnerships and collaborations that have been instrumental to your success.
Yes. So, on what I'll say, like the political or governmental side, our cities and our housing authorities have the tools. They have, like, we use the word toolbox all the time because it is a toolbox, right? I mean, there's not just one affordable housing program anymore. This isn't, the 1940s. It's not just public housing, or it's not the 1970s, right? There's not just Section 8. We have more tools than we've ever had before to build mixed income and affordable housing. And that's awesome. There are still roadblocks, those programs are not fully funded. Every year, more people show up asking for funding to these programs than is available. And also there's land use obstacles, namely zoning, and other building code and other requirements like, the parking code or parking requirements that, are obstacles to building housing more affordably, like, right, not just capital A affordable housing, but how can we build market rate housing more affordably, right, to offer it to a wider range of people. So the cities and the housing authorities and sort of the other political entities, so the city of Dallas, city of Fort Worth, for Ojala personally, Fort Worth Housing Authority, the city of Louisville, just to name a few of our recent partnerships that we've worked on. Cities are really stepping up and realizing the role they can play in creating affordable housing. Some of that's through subsidy, right? I mean, money, right? But some of that's just through constructive and creative partnerships that help make housing happen where it would have been difficult to otherwise make housing happen. The city of Dallas's mixed income housing development bonus, I think, is a good example of that, where, developers get to build bigger buildings or have easier zoning cases, or, well, that, can turn land into more housing than they otherwise would have. And in exchange, they build affordable housing units, right? It on paper, it cost the city nothing, and on paper, it cost the developer, a little bit of money, but they were going to build the building anyways. Plus, they get to build more units on the same piece of land, right? So it's a win-win. So those are, on the government side. On the sort of institution side, the banks, I give credit to, like, our local bankers. I mean, obviously, folks like you at Schwab, but there's plenty of Texas-based and even national banks that have a good Texas presence. Credit is a very local and community kind of business, like it's systems of trust, right? That's what banks are doing when they make you a loan. So I think there's a lot of good bankers here in Dallas that are willing to support projects. And, Hall has been fortunate in that regard where we've had some banks that sort of trusted us and went with us on a project where it was maybe not in a part of town where anyone wanted to, go finance $100 million building, but we figured out a way. And, um, that's a very important part of the equation is the banks are the, major funding sources for most of these projects.
Wow, that is pretty incredible that you were able to build such a cohesive table of different types of private and public partners from the public sector into financial services. Um, and kind of along those lines, I want to not necessarily switch gears, but dive a little bit deeper into the financing
Mm-hmm.
aspect of housing development that starts to come into play once you have the right partners at the table.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, um, when I think about financing affordable housing or housing projects in general, sometimes I think people think about it being similar to buying a home, where you put your down
Mm-hmm.
payment together
Yep.
and then you get financing from a bank, and 30 days later, you've got a home.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have come to realize from being in this field that when it comes to financing housing, it is not like that at all.
Yeah.
That it is a bit of putting a puzzle together.
Yeah.
So, can you spend a little bit of time, especially for those of us who are not familiar with the type of financing it takes to make a housing deal come together? Can you walk through for us what that looks like?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I layperson's terms is hard because I do spend the better part of usually more than 40 hours. This is my job. Like I finance affordable housing projects for a living. So this is, I could do the next hour on this topic. But um, you know, I mean, maybe we start with like buying a house and we sort of work backwards from there, right? So
Yeah.
like when you buy a house in this country, you're typically, anywhere from 97% of the house you're buying to maybe 80% of the house you're buying, you're going to the bank and getting a mortgage, right? So and you're paying that off over 30 years. It's debt. You make a monthly payment on it every month. You have a lender, right? And so starting from that, a multifamily complex, specifically an affordable multifamily complex, isn't that different, right? We're going to have a lender. They're going to make us a loan when we break ground for construction, and they're going to pay for, part of the building cost, and then we'll repay that for them or to them over 30 years, monthly payments. Now, the difference between your house and, you know, potentially 50, 60, $100 million apartment complex is the bank is not going to lend 97% of the value of the apartment complex because it's not built yet, right? They're taking too much risk. So, today a construction loan may only be for 50% or 60% of the value of the building. So you still got, again, let's just stick with this sort of $100 million project because the projects in Texas really are mostly that large these days. Many of them. I've got 50 million from the bank now that the project will repay over 30 years. Okay. I now have to go find 50 million other dollars from somewhere else, right? And so by and large, the largest program we have to fill that gap is what's called the Housing Tax Credit Program or the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. So LIHTC, you've probably heard is the abbreviation. So for LIHTC, the building, because the rents are so affordable, the building does not make a lot of money. There's not a lot of annual income from one of these properties. Any income that it does make is just going to pay down that mortgage that we talked about earlier. So the person that's putting the $50 million in to finish building the building, they have no annual income. From an investment perspective, it's ludicrous. You would never put $50 million into a building that doesn't make any money, right? So the tax credit, what it does is it gives the owner of the building an annual deduction of federal income tax that allows that investor to basically recoup. If they put $50 million in over the next 10 years, they get the right to not pay 55 million in federal income tax, right? So there's a slight profit because it's divided over 10 years, with interest and time value of money, whatever, right? So they basically recoup roughly their investment over 10 years. So the people that buy those credits, the people that are the ones actually putting the $50 million in, are mainly, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. It's the nation's largest financial institutions, because, they're really big and they have lots of income taxes because they make money every year, more or less, right? So that's sort of the mechanism by which the average affordable housing development, just sort of roughly speaking, would get financed. But the problem is that sometimes, so we've got 50 million of construction loan, we got 50 million of tax credits. What do you do if the building costs 110 million to build? Right? Where are you going to go get that 10 million from? You already exhausted the two sources that you could get, right? And so that's where things like the 2024 housing bond funds come in, which were charitable funds, could play a role. But that's where, when we talk about gap money, what we're really talking about is that, the building can go get a loan, the building can go get tax credits. Sometimes that's not enough. And so you could have a building that has $100 million already sourced for it. But if it cost 105 million to build, that project will not get built. And so putting $5 million in on a $100 million project is the difference between it happening and it never happening. And so, when we at the Dallas Housing Coalition, obviously we're very strong in support of the $200 million bond goal. And, we didn't get 200 million, but we did get a pretty good chunk of money devoted to housing, which is awesome. And so, the city putting 2 million or 5 million into a single project is going to be the difference between 300 affordable housing units getting built and those units never getting built. And the city's money is getting leveraged in this example, 20 to 1. It's a huge return on investment for the city compared to all the private capital that's going into the development. So that's sort of the I hope I explained that well enough that a layperson, would follow. But yeah, that's sort of really rubber meets the road for how affordable housing gets financed.
No, you really did. I mean, and I really come back to my puzzle metaphor that building housing, you can't just do it on your company's capital loan.
Yeah.
You can't just do it with financing from a financial institution. You really do need to have a combination of some of your own capital,
Mm-hmm.
financing from a bank, plus public sector investment coming from something like the low income housing tax credit program,
Right.
and local money like what we hopefully will see from the passage of the bond come May. So it really has to be all of those pieces coming together
Yeah.
to make mixed income housing or attainable housing possible, it sounds like.
Definitely. The last low income housing or LIHTC development that we closed was in August of 2023. It had 11 different sources of capital.
Wow.
From, banks, from Fannie Mae, from the city, from the county, from a 501c3 nonprofit. It takes a village, I think, is like a fair thing to say. But there's you have to get creative to get one of these projects financed. And this is a metaphor like I use a lot, and I think I may have even used on this show before. Like imagine, take it away from affordable housing for a second. Like pick something else, like affordable healthcare, right? Like if you wanted a hospital that someone could walk into and pay slightly less based on their income, someone's going to have to pay the difference for that, right? If you want to offer a product, a good, a service, whatever, housing, healthcare, for a price lower than it costs to produce that good, someone has to pay the difference, right? And so in some cities like New York City, where they force all developers to build 20% affordable housing on any new project that gets built, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, right? Who's paying the difference? It's the people living in the other 80% of units that they have to pay more
Mhm.
for the developer to afford to have 20% of units
Mhm.
offered below market rate, right? With when you have a city instead saying, hey, let's have a project that's 100% affordable and we're going to publicly finance it. We're going to put in the subsidy because it's the city's responsibility that like the city has failed in some, or, not Dallas, but just like cities in general. Like we have not produced enough housing in this country. There's a lot of reasons for that. And if we want to have housing that can be broadly afforded by a lot of people, it's going to cost someone something, right? So yeah, that's it takes money.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And some to switch gears yet again, but on a related topic, I want to talk about what else it takes to build housing
Mm-hmm.
besides money, and that is the community response to
Yes.
housing developments.
Yeah.
For those of us who may or may not know, affordable housing often faces opposition or challenges from local communities. How do you engage with and address concerns from community members and other stakeholders during the development process that we've just talked about?
Yeah, this is a tricky one because someone that's listening to this call, I might show up in your neighborhood one day and you might not be thrilled that I'm there. But
Mhm.
I guess like I want to um kind of separate really like well-intentioned concerns from neighbors and community members from NIMBYism. And so, NIMBYism meaning not in my backyard, NIMBY, right? We kind of joke, we call them bananas, build absolutely nothing anywhere close to anything, right?
Mhm.
Um, the but so the anyways, that didn't smell bananas. I think I got it wrong. But
I got you. I'm
yeah,
following your line of thought.
yeah. Um, and so like, there's like this real central tension with housing, especially for homeowners, right? And like it's very my wife and I bought our first house about a year ago. Like I'm in the boat of homeowner now, which is kind of scary. But
Welcome.
um the that everyone can like, and you're on this call, you'd probably agree with the statement, I want there to be more affordable housing, right? Like we want more affordable housing. All right, everyone wants more affordable housing. No one wants their house to be worth less, right? And there's a huge tension between those two statements. And so, like, when we go into a community and people have questions, like, we get it. Like, you're a homeowner in this neighborhood. You want to know how this is going to affect your property. And you can even agree with the statement, I want more affordable housing. And then there's always that but, or it's like, I want more affordable housing, but this is going to create more traffic in our neighborhood, or this is, going to lower our property values. And so, you know, traffic and property values are sort of the two that we're most ready to deal with now because we get those a lot.
Mhm.
And that's the funny thing about Dallas is like if we can add 300 units of housing like right on West Commerce and Beckley or right on a 6-lane state highway on Garland Road, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
That's 300 or 400 car trips a day that are probably currently coming in from, I mean, pick a city, right? Like Mesquite, Anna, Forney, Fort Worth, right? Like when we're building housing closer to our jobs, you are net reducing traffic, right? You're creating shorter car trips for everyone when you're building more dense housing.
Mhm.
And then two, on the property values is like, density really is what drives property value. So when we're building more dense housing, okay, you're going to get a coffee shop in your neighborhood that didn't used to have a coffee shop. All right, you're going to get right, and,
Mhm.
and and things like that, or where you're going to experience equity being built in your home as the homeowner from density and new development happening around you. Um, and those are sort of the well-intentioned, what I think neighbor concerns that you get a lot. there are NIMBYs, there are people who say things that are heinous. I've heard, if you're an affordable housing developer in Texas, you have to get really thick skin really quick because
Mhm.
I've been called, our projects have been accused of being funded by George Soros. I mean, like literally like QAnon, like right wing attacks
Mhm.
on affordable housing that were, again, yeah, weird example, but like it's real, like so um, those people you sort of just have to tune out because they don't have good intentions. You can try to have a reasonable conversation with them, and sometimes you can convince people to see that like you're not the big bad evil that they think you might be. But um, that's it's harder to engage with the people that have those sort of beliefs.
Yeah, no, that is a really good download of everything that you face that isn't financial related to building mixed income and affordable housing
Yeah,
in and around um, the Dallas and Fort Worth area. But you raised up a really important point, which I want to come back to, is that equity has a way of working for everyone. That
yeah,
um, when you think of something just targeting a specific group of people, when you really expand the lens, you see how there's really not just benefits for the person or the people that the equity measure or intervention is targeting, but really for everyone. And I think one of the best examples of that are the cut curbs, um, where they were originally created out of the ADA Act that passed in the
mhm,
90s, and helping people with various abilities get in and
mhm,
around the communities that they live. But over time, we found that they help people with strollers,
mhm.
they help people who are riding bikes, they help people who may have sprained their ankle on the pickleball court. Like, there's a lot of people that are helped by equity measures that
Yeah,
originally are just targeted to a specific
yeah,
person or group of people. And I think that I just want to bring that home and that point that you raised in my last question.
yeah.
Kurt, we're gonna have to do a part two. There's no way around it. I have so many more questions to ask you that I couldn't get to. We may just have to have a call just on policy and regulations that you deal with because we did not have a chance to get to that today. But I do want to give you the floor for any last parting words that you want to share with our audience, specifically from your perspective as a mixed income housing developer.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you're dialed into this call, you're already taking the right steps. And um I would just like encourage everyone that like it's not enough to just be anti-YIMBY or sorry, anti-NIMBY. We need YIMBYs, we need yes in my backyard, right? And so that's not just um oh, that developer is going to have a community meeting this month about the project in our neighborhood. Oh, well, I'm not opposed to it, so I'm not going to go, right? No, like I need you at that meeting because I need people in the room that support it and can stand up and say, like, we want this here, because otherwise it's just a chorus of no's because that's who shows up to the community meetings. And same thing at CPC, the City Plan Commission, and same thing at City Hall when these projects get approved. I mean, we need affirmative yes voices in the room to drown out the less well-intentioned opposition that these projects can sometimes face. So be YIMBYs. That's my challenge to everyone.
I can't think of a better note to end that on. Thank you so much, Kurt, for joining us this morning and sharing your unique perspective on the development of affordable housing and what it takes to make that happen in Dallas, and how Ojala is doing the work of making attainable and mixed income housing happen. We wish you and your company continued success in 2024.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we sign off today, just a couple of housekeeping items for those of you who are still with us. Please, after this call, go on Dallas Housing Coalition website and make sure that you are signed up on all of its social platforms so you can receive updates on what the coalition is working on and our next Housing for All webinar. While you're on the website, make sure that you're a member. Learn more about the work that you're doing. And if you're not a member, click that join the coalition button and join the coalition. And you can, as a member, stay up to date on everything that the coalition is working on and what its members, like Ojala here today, is working on in the housing space. Thank you again for joining us for another installment of our Housing for All webinar series, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. We're going to be taking a short hiatus over the next couple of weeks, but we will be returning on March 22nd with another impactful conversation. So with that, thank you everyone for joining.